we'll be discussing a country in the Middle East that is not Arab, but it has historically had a tremendous impact on its Arab neighbors and been in the American and Israeli limelight for many years, Iran, a land which many Arabs discuss and speculate about, but very few of us really know. A government that has been sympathetic to the Palestinians, but also a source of suspicion to Saddam's Iraq. Iran is home of one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations. It is physically one of the larger countries of the Middle East and is in fact the 18th largest country in the world. And with a population of over 70 million, Iran sits at a critically strategic point between the Gulf Coast in the south and the Caspian Sea to its north, and it is also the central crossing point between Europe, Asia, and Arabia. Its physical location, which is good to not only know for the sake of better understanding our world and the numerous ways that physical location affects the development of a society, it's also critical in this period of U.S. wars in the Arab and Muslim region. From Iran borders not only Iraq, but it also borders Pakistan and Afghanistan, where U.S. troops are heavily entrenched, both directly and indirectly. Iran also touches Russia, with whom U.S. relations have yet to fully thaw. So as you can see, Iran by default holds a critical seat on the world stage, especially today. And Iran is not only a much discussed topic in the United States, but in cafes, universities, and government offices across the Arab world, Iran is a regular subject. And depending on with whom you speak, Iran is either loved and idolized as a possible liberator of Palestinians from Israeli occupation, or seen as yet another intervener in Arab affairs, and sometimes treated with suspicion by a hardline Sunnis who see at best only a limited partnership between Iran and the largely Sunni Arab population. Iran's relationship to Iraq is quite long. In fact, after the Iranian Islamic Revolution, wherein the Western-backed Shah was overthrown and Iran adopted an anti-imperial constitution, replacing a monarchy with a theocracy, and a constitution defining Iran by a 98% vote as a Shia Islamic republic that expressly rejects not only imperialism and foreign influence and intervention, but also calls for positive liberty, political, social, and human freedoms defined by what's called a healthy moral value system. Well, shortly after this Islamic revolution, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein's leadership, launched a full-out war against Iran, invading the Iranian territory, only to start one of the world's deadliest wars in modern history, and to gain nothing but the temporary support of the United States and the West in its attempt to take Iranian land and to topple the revolutionary government of Iran. So that's just a bit of history to fill you in on Iran's role and significance in the world stage. And while it's not new that Iran makes the headlines, tonight we'll be discussing the most recent elections in Iran, media coverage of those elections, and we'll also touch a little bit on renewed Israeli threats against Iran and the U.S. decision to not intervene against those Israeli threats. We think it will be an exciting program because we have with us two Iranians to discuss the elections and maybe touch on the history and future of Iran. Our first guest is Mahdiz Keshavaris, an Iranian woman with a background in media and human rights organizing and activism. Since the start of the recent protests in Iran, she has worked to connect the media with voices of people within Iran, intent on ensuring that the people's movement taking place remains the product of those who are actively participating and not victim to special interests or outside groups. And we have also with us Ardashir Umani, who is an Iranian-born writer and has been an activist for over 40 years, working in the U.S. peace movement to promote dialogue and peace among nations, and is co-founder of the American-Iranian Friendship Committee. Ardashir also writes articles of analysis on Iran-U.S. relations and has been traveling back and forth to Iran quite regularly over the past few years. Thank you to you both for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting us.
You're more than welcome. We're very happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to what you have to tell us about Iran, because a lot of us in the Arab world don't know enough about Iran, and I am certainly no expert, but we, all of us, have been forced to take a peek into Iranian life, and lately, especially the younger generations, all we've seen is the controversy, the Western controversy, media controversy about Iran, the Iranian President Ahmadinejad, about possible intervention, Iranian intervention into the Sunni-Shiite divide in Iraq. And I'd like us to discuss this a little bit, if you can tell us your thoughts. Iran has played a sensitive role in the Middle East and in the Arab world for many decades. And it's very clear that Iran is not supporting the U.S. occupation of Iraq, but it does play what I will call a sensitive role in Iraq's internal political affairs. So I'm going to address it to either of you. What do you make of that? What can you tell us about Iran's role in the development and liberation of Iraq, and possibly in the tensions that are playing out between the Sunni and the Shiite population?
June 30th, just 9 days ago, was the status of forces agreement, according to which the United States forces should have been out of Iraq. But still, we are witnessing that 131,000 American soldiers in Iraq, not to mention 128,000 civilian but armed personnel in Iraq, which brings it to more than 250,000 military force inside Iraq.
I appreciate that, Ardashir, and we've discussed on this program and on this station at length the role of U.S. troops, be they combat troops or stationary troops or whatever they want to call them. It's clear that the U.S. occupation of Iraq is ongoing. And so the question really is, what, if any, role has Iran played in working towards the liberation of Iraq, if that's a topic that you want to discuss, or if you have any thoughts on that topic, or Mahdis, you can also jump in as you like. Can you tell us what, if any, role has Iran played in the Iraq War, the U.S. Iraq War?
I think that it's no secret that Iran has historically had a great interest in representing the voices of the oppressed within the region, whether it be Palestine and whether now it be Afghanistan or Iraq. We have obviously a vested interest in Iraq, given that it is the home to Karbala, which is a holy place for those of us who are Shia and believe in Imam Hussein and the tragedy that took place there. So as Iranians, as Shia Muslims, as members of humanity, I think we have a vested interest in being clear that the occupation that's happening now in Iraq is amongst the many injustices that are happening in the world. And so, without going into details about, because quite frankly I don't know, nor does many people, what the true role is, that there's many different interests in the region, and many different people are making a power play within the borders of Iraq. What the Iranian role is, I will say that I think that Iran has been a champion for the Palestinian cause and has been a champion for the Iraqis as well, in speaking for those who are being oppressed by imperialist colonial forces.
Thank you, Mahdis.
I would like to bring up also the question of Lebanon, which is part of the Arab world, has been very much influenced by the foreign powers, the French, the British, the United States, and we consider the Arabs are brothers and sisters. I should say that we have about 4 million Arabs in the southern part of Iran, and they are integrated into the society. When I lived in the southern part of Iran, we have a big refinery in Abadan, and many Arab population were working in that refinery, and so they were integrated. There was no problem. I have to insist on this question, on this issue, that there was no problem between Sunni and Shiites in Iran. Believe me, there was no problem between Muslims and the Jews in Iran. Practically, we lived together.